a really exciting aspect of our upcoming Old Master sale is the fact that we have lots of drawings, works on paper and studies by really big name artists like Mucha.
Yeah, Mucha, obviously, one of the big names in Art Nouveau art, and he's best known for his posters and illustrations. It's really exciting, I think, to have a drawing that shows his process and thinking, and we can see in this drawing how it could lend itself to a larger composition or an illustration. We don't actually know what it was intended for, whether it was a study or an illustration or just more intimate private work. But I think it's really nice to be able to see a process that you wouldn't ordinarily see from just a poster or an illustration that you get on a postcard.
So we also have this really sensitive portrait study by Sir Thomas Lawrence.
Yeah, it's interesting how, obviously with humans, we notice each other's faces first, and he has chosen to spend time rendering the face of the sitter before composing a larger composition.
Yeah.
There's some writing on the back, which is really interesting because it tells us a little bit about the sitter. Sketch for a portrait, which was never finished. Don't you think this is really interesting, all this?
Yeah, and it supposedly depicts Elizabeth Rickman, who is from the Hodgkin family, who actually became a very important dynasty. Howard Hodgkin, part of the Hodgkin family as well.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So we also have some studies which give us an insight into artists mapping out more complex compositions. So we have this drawing by Girodet depicting the revolt at Cairo. The finished painting was produced as a commission for Napoleon for the Chateau of Versailles, where you can still see the finished painting. But there are also numerous different studies by Girodet depicting sort of different stages of the artist's process, which is really interesting. So there are some looser pencil sketches showing the artist kind of mapping the space out, and then some more finished formal oil sketches. And this is sort of somewhere in between. Other versions are at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, at the Chicago Art Institute, and at the Cleveland Museum of Art. So this is really a museum-worthy piece.
Don't you think it's interesting how, like, all the different faces, they're quite expressive, even though it's just the artist is mapping out where the figures are going to go for a large composition.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting that they've chosen to include expressions on the faces.
I think that partly suggests that this might be a bit more of a developed study, not sort of a super loose mapping out the space, but a slightly more finished version, because obviously the lines are quite sharp and it's giving a sense of getting near a finished composition, but just not fully realised. So we also have this oil study by Dmitriev-Orenburgsky, which is a preparatory study for a bigger finished work called Sunday, Easter in a Village. And again, it sort of shows the artist trying to figure out the spatial composition of the piece, which is quite important because it's a scene that shows figures dancing and moving in a village street. What I find particularly charming about this piece is the fact that almost because it's a study and it's more loosely painted, it actually creates a sense of movement which befits the joviality and the dancing of the scene. Got to the stage of the artist preparing an oil study, which is sort of further along down the line from if they're sketching, or clearly they've got a more finished idea of where they're going with the painting. But it's, as I said, quite loose, and we don't really have the details and faces of any of the figures.
Unlike the Girodet.
Yeah, that's true. More
how different artists.
Yeah, and I
different
suppose
processes.
it's also kind of relates to the different media of the work, and the fact that you can maybe get a bit more of a finish with a sketch on paper than you can in an oil study.
In terms of studies for larger works, or just studies in general, I think my favourite in our sale is this one here by Sir George Hayter, which is a portrait of Charles Elphinstone Fleming, and it's a preparatory sketch for his large work, The House of Commons, which is in the collection of the National Portrait Gallery. If you haven't seen it, you definitely should. It's fantastic because the picture contains over 400 identifiable figures, and Hayter, he painted each figure in study form before assembling the composition. And I think it's really great to see this work. I mean, it's really charismatic. I'm sure if you knew the man, you'd be able to point out who he was.
So who was he?
So Charles Elphinstone Fleming entered the Navy as a young man, and actually by the age of 20 he reached the rank of commander, so he was really very young, and he fought in the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars before he was elected as MP of Stirlingshire in 1802, so he made that shift over into politics, which I think is quite interesting, really.
Interesting figure.
Yeah.